Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and the 1010 concurrent enrollment class. We are now in the St. Martin's Guide to Writing lecture number 11. We have worked in the first 10 lectures through the first 10 chapters, and we now turn to part 2 of St. Martin's Guide. We are working again in the 12th edition, the short edition, chapters 11 and 12, what they call critical thinking strategies. Now, let's pause for a moment and put this in our notes. Why is this information important? Because the catalogs for invention and inquiry strategies, as well as the catalog of reading strategies, are ways in which within the academic community that we excel. So we want to pay particular attention to the suggestions that are being made. Now again, just to remind, your annotative work here for this section of reading, only bullet pointing. Give us a footprint to show us that you at least looked at it. Study closely the headings. If you see language you're unfamiliar with, slow down, take some good notes. If you're seeing things that you've already heard before, either in lectures in 303 or elsewhere, then obviously you can move rather quickly through this information. I'm just simply going to summarize as we go through now chapters 11 and 12. Let's start with chapter 11, a catalog of invention and inquiry strategies, starting of course with one that we use often in 303, the mapping strategies. Notice that cluster diagram on page 421 is a classic exemplar. We can also use listing on 422. The list to create and generate a plan quickly. And then of course at the bottom of 422, the outlining and different kinds of outlining. For example, notice you have your scratch outlining, example on page 423. Of course, chunking, which is a type of scratch outlining that's commonly used by professional writers in business and industry, especially well suited to collaborative and multimodal composing, right? And where you have the headings, we obviously do quite a bit of that in 303. 424, the topic outlines and the sentence outlines. Obviously, you've been taught these with exemplars there for the formal topic outline, the formal sentence outline on 425. The second part of this chapter 11 is to discuss issues of writing strategies. All of these will be familiar to you, but we can go ahead and go through them quickly. Cubing, exploring a topic from the 6 perspectives of describing, comparing, associating, analyzing, applying, and arguing. Obviously, we're familiar with all of these as we have worked through the last 10 chapters of Axelrod Cooper. I like on 427, I really want you to pay attention to this one, the constructing of a dialogue to explore and experience an alternative view. Dialogue, a conversation. You could write a conversation between 2 speakers, write a brief response to keep the conversation moving fast. Also, 427, they suggest using dramatization to analyze behavior. The great philosopher Kenneth Burke has suggested this is a great way of thinking about how people interact and as a way of analyzing stories and films. Thinking about human behavior, I'm just reading now, thinking about human behavior in dramatic terms can be very productive for writers. Drama has action, actors, setting, motives, methods. Notice your five-pointed star there at the bottom of 427. And for each one of those, obviously you can ask all kinds of questions, right? Action, the question is what? Actor on 428, the question is who. Setting is of course when and where. Motive is of course why, and method is how. Great way to think about it. 428, another way to generate ideas is free writing. Of course, we call it jam writing, and then looping down below. These are exemplars of not allowing distractions to get in the way. Any kind of editor's voice, critical voice, to stand that down and then to just write non-stop, right? For the 10 minutes or 15 minutes or half an hour or whatever. Obviously, journaling and notes, taking and journaling at 429 is significant. I really like their suggestion on 430, so I want you to camp there for a few seconds. Asking questions to explore a subject systematically. This is of course a key. This is a key in our reading as well as in our annotating as well as in our writing. That notion of a dialogue, right? And it is especially important in writing because we're always considering the acrimonious audience, as we have said in earlier lectures. Chapter 12, a catalog of reading strategies. They're all listed for you there on 432. We'll work through them each one quickly, from annotating to taking inventory to outlining, paraphrasing, summarizing, synthesizing, contextualizing, as well as exploring the significance of figurative language, looking for patterns of opposition, reflecting on challenges to beliefs and values, evaluating logic of an argument, recognizing emotional manipulation, and judging the writer's credibility. Now, we, of course, in 303 use the term annotation to subsume all of those and even more reading strategies, okay? But we're going to go through this now quickly, and the genius, I think, of this chapter is that they begin with Martin Luther King's great Letter from a Birmingham Jail. If you are unfamiliar with Letter from a Birmingham Jail, I recommend that's where you start. The full text is not provided here, but you can easily find that. And as well, I recommend that you take a look at the several lectures that I've given on LearnStrong.net, specifically treating this classic text. I mean, as we have said many times, in the history of American thought, obviously the Declaration of Independence is there, obviously the Gettysburg Address is there, obviously I Have a Dream speech is there, but in many ways, one of the foundational pieces of writing that we must study again and again is the genius Letter from a Birmingham Jail. It's one of the most remarkable pieces of persuasive writing. I speak a lot about why that's the case. This entire chapter is built around that famous letter as King is trying to convince those white ministers of Birmingham that they should be supporting his cause. I'm going to expect then in our comments now following that you've already got working familiarity with King's Letter from a Birmingham Jail so that you'll understand what we're talking about. They, of course, begin with the very term, annotating the marks, specifically internal, within the book, external, off the book. Obviously, you're doing all kinds of things when you're trying to annotate. And of course, you can't annotate our school volume, but I do recommend once you hit the university experience, the college experience, where you're purchasing your own books, that you are in fact marking up those books well but intelligently. They give you a really good example on 434, 435 of what good internal annotation looks like. And so I want you to pay attention. They've just given you a cutting from a little bit of the Letter from a Birmingham Jail. On 439, they talk about ways of taking inventory. On 440, they talk about the outlining. You have a brilliant outline provided for you at the bottom of 444, 441, just to kind of give you an example. Of course, you're familiar with our what we call paragraph outlining. On 441, we do this a lot. For example, in the Jacobus study, when we're working with World of Ideas, we expect you to do a paragraph outline of each paragraph to summarize to a single word. On 442, we are introduced to the notion of paraphrasing and quoting and summarizing. Now, sometimes these can be a bit confusing. Paraphrasing, I'm just reading now with you on 442, is a restating a text you've read by using mostly your own words. It can help you clarify the meaning of an obscure or ambiguous passage. It's one of the three ways of integrating other people's ideas and information into your own writing, along with quoting, which is, of course, reproducing exactly the language of the source text, and summarizing, distilling the main ideas or gist of the source text. And obviously, we're going to talk first about paraphrasing. Look at your exemplar there on 442. Then summarizing, relatively brief restatement, primarily in reader's own words, of the reading's main ideas. And there you have your example on 443. And then, of course, the synthesizing on 440 involves presenting ideas and information gleaned from different sources. Here, obviously, is our external validation word. All right? And then, of course, contextualizing is the critical reading strategy that enables you to make inferences about a reading's historical, cultural context, examine differences between its context and your own, 445 and following, right? And then a good example at the top of 446. On 446 at the bottom, we will explore the significances of figurative language. Of course, we call this in our annotative process level 2B, the rhetorical level. Obviously, figurative language involving the study of metaphors and similes and symbolism. We should point out that often immature young students will imagine that you only have metaphor in poetry or something like this, or we only involve similes in poetry. And of course, this is insane because obviously King's going to do it all the way through Letter from a Birmingham Jail, which is what makes it such a powerful text. They give you all kinds of exemplars on 447, right? 448, the patterns of opposition. All texts carry them within themselves voices of opposition, voices that may echo the views and values of readers the writer anticipates. Obviously, the acrimonious audience is here. One of the reasons why we study Letter from a Birmingham Jail is for this very study and analysis. Obviously, on 449, reflecting on challenges to your beliefs and values is as well hypercritical when we do good reading, as well as evaluating the logic of an argument on 450. The ABC test, we've heard it before, but let's go through it again. A, The reasons in support must be appropriate, A, to the thesis. B, the reasons in support must be believable. C, the reasons in support must be consistent with one another as well as complete. And of course, that's what good academic writing should be. And then we go through each of those, the tests for appropriateness, the test for believability on 451, and finally, the test for consistency and completeness on 452. Recognizing emotional manipulation is really as well important, starting on page 452. Obviously, our study of King's A Letter from a Birmingham Jail, we talk at length about the tone of that essay and as well the attempts to either intentionally manipulate emotional renderings or not to do so. We talked about how King is just genius at both of these. Of course, judging a writer's credibility by testing for knowledge at the bottom of 453, testing for common ground, and finally, the great test for fairness. All of these strategies are important when we read. It is, of course, our goal to become solid readers so that we can become solid writers and thinkers within the academic community. Thank you.